welcome to you all on Staffordshire Day. My name is Hilary. I work for Staffordshire Libraries, and it's our aim today to celebrate the great breadth of writing talent across our county, from the north and around Stoke right down to our most southerly tip in Kinver. We're featuring 8 authors in conversation over the day, as well as cameo pieces from several more authors, so do look out for those on Facebook. So today, I'm really pleased to welcome 4 of our Staffordshire authors. They are Tom Bryson.
Hi.
Hello. Misha Herwin.
Hello.
Mary May Lewis.
Hello.
And Jim McGrath.
Hi there.
Hello. So firstly, I'll put this to Mary May. Can you each tell us a little bit about the sort of books that you write? Over to you, Mary May.
Well, mine, all my work is really real life family saga stuff, and it's all based on mainly my personal experience of life. I mean, I'm not going to tell you my age, but you can see I'm a pensioner, and I have travelled a lot. I married quite young. And my first book, which is here, Where There's a Will, There's a Woman, it's about a young girl from the Potteries, very working class, and she marries into eccentric, very artistic family. She thinks, a cut above her and all the rest of it. And it's how she learns to survive in this family.
Is this autobiographical?
It's very, but it's marketed as a novel because it's in third person. It's had to be, but I can say now it is based on my life. My next book, which will be out this year, is called Don't Stop the Fiesta, and that's based on me and my husband. It's a 50,000 word memoir, and it's based on me and my husband buying a house in Spain 20 years ago.
Sounds lovely.
And and the life we've had for 20 years, coming and going, and so very, very much family sagas. And obviously we've travelled a lot.
So
we've lived in the Caribbean, we've lived in Africa, and so I've drawn on all these elements.
Thank you. That's great. Okay.
Yeah.
So same question to Jim. So tell us about the sort of books that you write then, Jim, please.
Long-winded story. I always wanted to write, but I would get to about 10,000, 20,000 words and throw it in the bin because it was rubbish. And I always thought I'd write novels, but I did enjoy management books, popular management books. And after I finished my doctorate at Birmingham, I was quite old by then. I was fortunate. Pearson's were sending people around to see if there were anybody in the university who wanted to write a book. I had an idea. Ever since I read Up the Organisation, which was a huge bestseller in the 70s, I wanted to write a popular management book. And I came up with the idea of having a theory outlined on one page and how to apply it on the other page. And Pearson's said yes. And so we ended up with the Little Book of Big Management Theories. Lovely. And that's run to 4 copies in that series. But I still wasn't writing what I wanted to write. And then I decided when I retired to have a go at writing my great crime novel. Not easy. First came the characters. I knew I wanted to write about Handsworth, which is where I was brought up as a kid. And the first book I wrote was set in Thornhill Road Police Station. I used to live on Holly Road, which was connected to Thornhill Road, and opposite Handsworth Park, which is a marvellous park. The first book I wrote was A Death in Winter, 1963. And I've written 3 more since then in the same series, and it's about a young Irish probationary officer who joins the police and is helped by a mad West Bromwich Albion fan called Clive Clark. what was interesting, and I will say this, I was writing the book and it didn't come alive until I introduced the character of Clive Clark, and then it just blossomed. You know, I was going to have Clive Clark, for those who don't know, was the best winger West Bromwich Albion ever had, in my opinion. My boyhood hero. I was going to call him Tony Brown because he was the all-time top goal scorer at West Bromwich Albion. But Tony Brown just didn't seem to have the character. And for some reason, Clive Clark did. Although he was a Yorkshireman. And it worked brilliantly. Brilliant. It's about a group of paedophiles who they do not like. The police close the case down. Clive Clark and Michael Collins don't close the case down and keep investigating. So that's the first one.
So that's the first one of several.
Well, there's three more. The next one is about an arsonist, very nasty arsonist. The third one was about two stories, actually. One, a serial killer, although there weren't serial killers in 1960, they didn't call them that, who is attacking the homosexual community in Birmingham. But also the other story is about London gangs trying to take over Birmingham. And then the fourth one is about corruption in Birmingham. And I will say this, as far as I'm aware, there were no major corruption stories in Birmingham, unlike Newcastle, not Newcastle upon Tyne. There were big problems.
Right, interesting. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that then. Okay, Misha, what about yourself? Tell us about what you're writing.
Right, well, I write a large variety of books and stories. I write for children, and I'm in the middle of writing a series called The Adventures of Letty Parker, which is set in an alternative Victorian England. I've also written in lockdown a book called The Awesome Adventures of Poppy and Amelia, which I wrote with my granddaughter, and all the proceeds from that book are going to leukemia research. But the other focus is women's fiction. And for women's fiction, I write both family. I've written a family saga. I write books that deal with often older women and the kind of problems that they encounter as they get older. So, for instance, in Picking Up the Pieces, the main characters all are suddenly faced with having to make a living at the age of 50 plus, and the book is about how they manage that. Then my other fascination is with time and time slip. So I've written two books, House of Shadows, and my latest, which is Belvedere Crescent, which is basically all about how you can slip between one time and another. And this book features a pair of identical twins, Sadie and Thea, who as babies are abandoned and brought up by their great aunt Jane, who has a real interest, an academic interest in the occult. And when she discovers that Sadie has the ability to slip between one time and another, she nurtures this twin at the expense of the other. Added to this, there is a family curse that will have to be dealt with by the end of the novel. And to a certain extent, it explores the relationship between the two sisters and the whole thing about how you feel when somebody dies. I'm not going to give away any more.
No, please don't.
What the book is about. I also write short stories, and I've had numerous short stories published in anthologies, both in the UK and the US.
So, Tom, what about yourself? What's your style of writing? What are you putting out?
My style of writing essentially is crime thrillers, but I also write standalone novels, which can be a mixture of pretty eclectic, in fact. My crime novels basically are set in Birmingham in the Black Country. I've yet set one in Staffordshire, but I'm working on that. And essentially, I use a Detective Chief Inspector Matt Proctor as the main protagonist in the crime novels. I've written 3 of those so far, and I hope to continue that as a series. But in addition to that, I also write standalone books, and the latest one I've written, in fact, takes me back to Ireland. Actually, Jim mentioned the Young Irish Cop. Well, I've written a coming-of-age story about a young boy going through post-puberty and the traumas of that life back in my native city of Derry, Londonderry. So that's a bit of a departure for me. Another very different novel I've written is this one here called Sarcophagus. And sarcophagus refers to the Chernobyl nuclear number 4 reactor that exploded with devastating consequences. And essentially, I've researched that fully. I also had the opportunity with the University of Birmingham to spend a little bit of time working in Ukraine. So I became quite familiar with that world and the background to it. So those are the two, in essence, those are the 2 main areas, Matt Proctor crime novels and standalone stories as well. Oh, and by the way, a little filler. This is more local.
Oh,
Timber Edge.
Is that a fictional account?
Well, let's not jump to conclusions. Birmingham, the Black Country, were bombed during World War I. 2 Zeppelin airships were spotted in the area, and they caused a lot of damage in various parts of the Black Country in Birmingham. The story has grown up in Kinver that one of those Zeppelin airships had engine problems and had to land at Timber Edge for emergency repairs. So I took the idea. I used those magic 2 words for writers. What if? What if a young Kinberman saw a Zeppelin airship in Timber Edge in 1916, World War I, and went to investigate? And then the consequences are detailed in this fictional story, how it changed his life.
Oh wow, that's very eclectic, very wide-ranging. Well, I think we've proven there that Staffordshire has a very wide range of authors in situ. So that's wonderful to hear. Thank you. So I've got another question now for you all to ponder on. So how did you first get into writing? What inspired your first book? I think, Mary May, you might have mentioned this already to some extent, but why did you feel you had to write it down?
Things were happening in this family, and one bizarre thing led to another. I did try to tell people what was happening, and lots of people said, "Oh, just write it down. Just write it. Nobody will believe you. Fact is stranger than fiction." So, and I thought, okay, I will. I've always written a lot of letters, and I like telling stories verbally. So I thought, well, I'll have a go. I was retired from teaching, and I thought, yes, I'll make this into a novel. Yeah. So I did, but before I actually finished it, it took me 7 years to write.
Wow.
Things were I think in Stoke-on-Trent we had a writing competition called To Write. It's not running anymore. I think it went for 5 or 6 years. Well, I actually entered the first year with a short story about my childhood, and the local paper interviewed me and made a feature of the story. I mean, I didn't win. And finally, I think it was 2017, I came runner-up in a short story competition.
Oh, well done.
I'm pleased with that. And then, well, I'd already, after writing my first short story, I kept writing more and more short stories. And then I thought, well, I'll do this family saga. Funny enough, the book I'm going to publish now, this year, Don't Stop the Fiesta, I actually had that in my mind to do 20 years ago when we bought this house in Spain. Though I was reasonably good at English, learning, knowing how to write is a hard, difficult thing to do. So really, I was learning on the job, going on, as you say, going to writing courses, reading everything you could read, how to write. Yeah.
Fine, thank you, Mary May. So, same question. How did you get into writing? What inspired your first book? Should we go to Tom this time, I think?
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, I think I first got into writing through listening to stories, oral storytelling, and it largely came from my mum when I was a young lad. She would have her women friends around often, and she would read the tea leaves. This was before tea bags, by the way. so she would shake the cup and move the tea leaves around the side of the cup, and then she'd stare into these and she would say things like, "Oh, Kitty, I can see you're going to have a visitor from a long way away. In fact, it's a young dark man, and I think he's coming on this ship." And of course, Katie would say, "Oh my God, that's my nephew. He's coming from New York. How did you know that?" And what Katie didn't know is that Katie had mentioned this about 6 months previously. And I'd clocked this as a young lad, and I realized how she was doing this actually. So the actual forecasting the future was a bit of a con, shall we say.
Well, you've ruined it now for us.
and it taught me, to some extent, a particular art of storytelling, which is to intrigue, mystify, and unlike what I've just done, don't give the secret away too soon.
Okay, so the same question then to Misha. How did you get into writing? How inspired your first book?
Right, how did I start writing? I think when we were children, we were always read to, right from when we were very, very small. And we were always, because my parents were Polish and came to England as immigrants after the Second World War, I was always fascinated by the stories they both told and didn't tell. And the didn't tell is actually possibly more significant than the ones we were told. So we had that feeling of the interest in story and in family that was going on. And I think also I played a lot of imaginary games with my sister and I told her stories. So my very first completed thing that I ever wrote was a play for a theatre that we made out of a cardboard box. I wrote, right when I was about 12, I wrote a book about a magic owl. Full chapters, and my sister did the illustrations. That's really where it started. What I find with my books is that a character comes into my brain, often in a particular place, and from then on I need to tell their story, so it kind of takes over.
Okay, and over to Jim then now. So how did you get into writing, and what inspired your first book apart from West Bromwich Albion? I'm thinking about your fiction rather than your non-fiction.
I think I came over from Ireland when I was about 5, and I was quite ill. I missed a lot of school, and so I didn't learn to read till I was about 10.
Wow.
And the first thing I ever read for myself was The Amazing Spider-Man #9. I was probably about 9.5 at the time when I read it. By the time I was 12, I was reading Harold Robbins, The Carpetbaggers and The Adventurers, all the James Bond novels. And I just wanted to write a thriller. And I did try it. I tried various courses, all of which, well, I failed. Because it was back to this thing. I would get halfway through and I think this is rubbish. And that went on for a long time. And then when I was at Birmingham University doing my doctorate, I said to myself, I was quite near completing the thesis. And I said to my supervisor when I was about halfway through writing it, I said, "This is rubbish. I don't think it's going to pass." And he says, how far have you got? And I said, "Well, I'm somewhere in the middle." And he says, "Jim, everything is crap in the middle." And That was the best piece of advice I've ever received. I constantly think about it. I get about halfway through and I think this is rubbish, and I think, no, Des said everything in the middle is rubbish.
Rubbish.
And
Yeah.
So I don't know what drove me at that particular moment in time. I think it was the idea of writing about Handsworth, writing about two coppers. I knew an awful lot of police because at the university I taught a lot of police who were about to retire and wanted to get into training, and I was in the Faculty of Education there. So once I had the two characters in mind and an idea, I started writing. And I don't know if anyone's seen the film Their Finest Hour, which is it's a wonderful film. It's set in the war and it's about making a film for propaganda purposes, but it's got to be a good film. And they did something in it, which is what I did, which is I wrote down how this started, the story. I wrote down how it ended, and I wrote down things that would happen. And then as I continued to write, I would find that I needed more post-it notes to fill in bits and to link things together. And so I developed a way of writing which just worked for me. But everybody's different. Everybody writes in a different way.
That's what intrigues me is the writing process, which was bringing me to my next question actually. So you use the post-it method, and you've kind of plotted it out then, but then do the characters emerge? Do they tell their own stories through your writing?
When I first started to write, I thought everything had to be planned out, and that was another problem. How do you plan an 85,000 word novel? It's almost impossible. So what I do, it's a mixture of planning, having a broad overview of what the story is and the characters, and then letting the characters run riot. Right. Follow where they go. And it's people say, what do you do when you what's the word? When you can't write any longer?
Yeah. Writer's block.
Writer's block, yes. I've never had writer's block. I probably have, but I just sit in the seat and in front of the computer until it goes away. And then one thing I always do is go back and read the previous day's work, and that moves it on. But like I said about Clive Clark earlier, as soon as he walked into the office, he was fully formed. In a single day, I knew his history. I knew he'd been a commando in the war. I knew he was a really dangerous man, although he was the smallest policeman in Birmingham. I just knew everything about him.
Weird.
I know less about Collins, who's the main protagonist, but it's a strange process, fascinating process. I think we all like it when a character takes over.
That's great. Thank you, Jim. So, Tom, what about yourself? What's how do you write it? Are you a plotter, or are you a free-flowing, free-thinking?
I'm very much a mixture of both, actually. I often think of this idea of plotters and planners as a spectrum. At one end, you have planners who have every detail plotted out in advance. At the other end of the spectrum, you have they call them pantsers, fly by the seat of your pants writers. I'm somewhere sort of in the middle, but I do err a bit towards the planning side because I like to have a good outline of the story in the first instance. But what I would go on to say is that I'm a bit of a news junkie. I'm always intrigued by current affairs. What's in the news? What are the big issues of the day? And I try and pick up on some of those and weave those big issues of the day into my stories. I like to think they're character driven. I think people give me feedback and say that they are. My cop, Matt Proctor, is one of these classic flawed characters. He has his good points and he has his weak points. So I try and make sure it's character driven. But I also like the plot to say something about the world we live in, to hold up a mirror, if you like, to ourselves and the issues of the day. For example, this particular book here, No Way Out, this is to do with set in Birmingham, and that's to do with a secret cult that actually seeks to exploit and manipulate young women. And it's also related in some way to modern slavery. So that's a very contemporary theme that I've tried to bring about in this book. But that's basically my approach, you know, a nugget of an idea, an outline, know your characters as well as you can, but try not to plan everything in absolute detail. Give yourself some breathing space so the story can move and develop.
Great, thank you. So Misha, what about yourself then? Because you write such a wide variety of fiction. I should think you must. It sounds like you. There's a lot going on. Are you a plotter or a winger, a pantser?
I think like Tom, I'm a mixture of both, to be honest. But as I said before, what happens with me is that I have the character and I can see them in a specific place and I can hear their voices in my head. And place often inspires me to that Belvedere Crescent started because there is a particular row of Georgian terraces in Bristol where I was brought up, and that road for some unknown reason is hardly ever gets the sun, so it has this dark feeling about it, and you feel that behind those facades there is a story, and that was a story that was sort of nurtured for ages, because we used to walk past that particular row of houses on our way back from school when I was in secondary school, which is quite a while ago, and that story came from there. But yes, I do plan. I like to have a chapter by chapter plan. However, I know perfectly well that it won't work like that I will have to modify it, that I will have to change it. Particularly the first chapter often gets rewritten numerous times because that's the one that has to hook your reader. And if you haven't gripped them at the beginning, then they won't bother to go. Especially if nowadays, when you can have a hardback, a paperback, or an ebook. And especially with an ebook, you can look at the first chapter or the first few pages on Amazon and just decide, no, this isn't gripping me, so I'm not going to go any further, and I'm not going to buy the book either. So I think for me, it's a mix. I find once I'm in the book, I'm actually in that world, and sometimes it's really difficult to get out. To the weird point that just occasionally I've written about something and I've had to think sometime later, did that actually happen in real life? Or did I make it up? Because some of the themes, and I think theme is incredibly important in a book, that it's not just the story and it's not just the characters, it's the underlying theme. And unless the theme works for me, the book just doesn't come together. So it'll be a theme that I'm interested in as well, or that I find is surfacing. And that will be based on things that have happened in my life or in other people's lives, or I've heard about in the news, or sometimes even had a conversation with people on the bus, and that sparks the idea of perhaps relationships, something like that. So yes, and that's where the book will have to be shaped. So it's really a mix of both, and as has been said before, we all do it differently.
Oh yes, there's no right way or wrong way, is there? Everybody has their own way. I just think it's interesting how it's crafted. So Mary May, what about yourself? How do you yours is autobiographical, so I suppose in a way the lines are there, aren't they? The plot lines are there. However, do you then embroider?
Of course, you embellish, or you tell the story as it is, but then you craft it, rework it, add a few things. Obviously, as I say, mine's a true story, but I had to research things like what was the music of the day, and you, like was being said before, you incorporate news items that, weave them in. I mean, they may not have been, obviously there's quite a few things that are invented, that kind of thing, or because you can't remember everything, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
But
So-
yeah,
so-
the story tells itself. It happens, and I feel I'm a very emotional person, obviously, I think. And something happens, either really joyful or very sad, and it really burns into me. And I feel, oh, I have to get it out on paper.
On paper. Mm-hmm.
And I think I've got a good memory.
Mm.
And well, so it's there. So if something traumatic happens, it's there. It's burned into your memory.
Mm.
And it's like when you're telling your story in court.
Ooh.
They know if you're telling the truth, generally, because if it's the truth, it's there. You've lived it.
Yeah.
It's become part of you.
But I suppose with writing
Right.
your first book, Where There's a Will, There's a Woman, because it is fiction, although it's based on you.
Yes.
Does that give you free rein to make yourself somebody that you aren't? Or
well, I did. Yes, I did make it fiction because I could do that. Yeah, and I think in that book there are 2 chapters I've had to imagine, because I'm imagining what somebody else was doing when I was doing something else. You see, so yes, it's still fiction, and probably yes, I think I probably made myself better looking, and slimmer.
That's your right.
But there you
do that. Our author's prerogative. Okay, thank you. So we've got a few questions that have been we mentioned that we're putting this out on Facebook book chat, the Staffordshire Library's book chat group, and some of our book chat people that join us for events and contribute to comments on the Facebook have sent a few questions in. So I'd just like to ask this one to you. It's a really interesting one. Does writing exhilarate or exhaust you? And we'll put this one to Jim, I think, first. So are you exhausted or exhilarated or somewhere in between?
If things are going well, I'm bouncing for the rest of the day, and I can't sleep that night, and I'm thinking about the work the next day. If I'm sitting there in front of the machine and I'm wading through concrete with leather boots on, then I'm not very enthusiastic. But the joy of it is that you don't know how it's going to work. Yeah. I do know that once you've got, Mary was saying this, if you invest your feelings in the work, then it really does make a difference. So if you are moved by what you're writing, in one of the books I've got a dog who's dying, and it's an important dog, it's an important character, and the chap who paints the covers of my books, he's got a Staffordshire Bull Terrier. I've had a Staffordshire Bull Terrier as well, and he was saying that he was almost in tears. Well, I was almost in tears writing it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, because that's. I think if you're moved by what you're writing, the reader will be moved by what you're writing. But what you're writing does affect you. I think it was Misha earlier was saying about living with characters and wondering if they were real or events were real. When I'm writing the fiction, my wife, I'll tell my wife something, and she can't distinguish whether I'm talking about real life people or characters.
Mm.
and it's obvious to me, but it's not obvious to her.
She's not in your head.
Yeah, so they do take you over, and you've got to give them a voice. And if you do it reasonably well, in your opinion, then you're a very happy bunny.
Thank you. That's what we want. So, Tom, can I ask you the same question? Does writing exhilarate or exhaust you?
I think as Jim was saying, it can be a mixture of both. But on the whole, I would say exhilarating. It just gets you engaged sometimes with the world that you are exploring in your own head. That is unreal, is fictional, but nevertheless you are going someplace, that you've never been before. So it can be very exhilarating from that point of view. I also have a dog story. In one of my novels, there is a dog. It belongs to the daughter of my protagonist, Cop, and that dog is featured quite a bit. The dog's called Barney, great dog, much loved by Sarah Proctor, the Cop's daughter. I'm not going to do a spoiler here because it's my first novel that this is in. The dog is significant at a particular point in the story, and I must say that after I finished the novel and put it down, I've had several readers come back to me and said, "Oh, I love the bit about the dog, Tom, but."
Oh, but.
And I leave it hanging.
Oh, right. Okay, that's intriguing. Thank you. Right. Okay, then. Mary May, are you exhilarated or exhausted when you write?
Well, both, obviously both. Yeah. And I would say frustrated sometimes. At the moment, especially, I'm not getting the time to do as much as I want because I'm in England, and as I've said elsewhere, I do most of my writing in Spain, where I'm got peace. I don't have peace here. It's exhausting because when I'm in Spain, I write day and night. Usually, it is exhausting. Right. But like you say, when you've done it and when you publish, yes, it's a wonderful feeling. It's like having a baby. It's the best. It's your baby. It's the best thing since sliced bread.
When it's all over.
Yeah, anything that's creative, isn't it? I suppose artists feel the same when they've done a painting and somebody else appreciates it,
Yeah, great.
It's wonderful to do it. I love it.
Right. Yeah. And Misha, what about yourself? I suspect you're similar to the others, exhausting and exhilarating.
It's a mixture of both. That moment before you start, though, is like plunging into cold water, and it's really quite scary. And once you get in, and once it's flowing, I really, really don't want to get out again. And I keep thinking that. It's like after this interview, I'm going upstairs and I'm writing more of my first draft of my current novel, and it will be rubbish, like all first drafts are, very sketchy. But I can't wait to get back and put some more words onto the file. So, yes, and at the end of the day, when I've been writing, I actually find I'm quite tired. And I tried to work out what it was that was tiring. And I think it's the emotion. It's been said before today that you put your emotions into your writing. So it's a mix of the emotion that you're pushing in and that you're often dredging out from places you weren't aware of. Yeah. And the exhilaration of a day when it's flowing is brilliant.
Wow, that's fantastic. I must say, you've all make it sound really exciting to be on this this process of making a book. So yeah, well, congratulations. I think my final question really to you all now is something that Mary May touched on. It's about sense of place. Thinking about that, we're talking about Staffordshire Day. I'd had got on my question. One of my questions was, "What's the view from your window into Staffordshire?" But I think Mary, you said about that you write best in Spain. Is that because of the scenery or the peace and quiet? So do you want to tell us a bit more about how have you got a beautiful view over a pool? I'm imagining a pool and palm trees and daiquiri in your hand and.
Oh, no. Okay. Well, not far off. No, the house is. We've got a house. It's a 2-story. You'd say semi, but they're not identical. Typical Spanish house, whitewashed with a massive terrace, and we're actually in southern Spain. And here we are. So I can actually hear the waves crashing on the cliffs below.
Wonderful.
All the time, more or less. And then. 180-degree view of the sea, uninterrupted.
Incredible.
Lovely.
So that's quite
so it's therapeutic. It's lovely.
Quite a contrast to where you grew up then.
Oh, absolutely. Tunstall. I'm Tunstall. Terrace in Tunstall.
So your inspiration's in Spain, then. That sounds wonderful. Jim, what's your view? What's your inspiration?
My best writing is when I'm totally involved in writing, and I'm not looking at anything. But what I do is go and have a look at some of the sites that I want. And so, for example, coming from the village, the characters walk past this lake, and David Brown, who is the painter for my covers, he says, "There's no lake that side." I said, "There is." He says, "There isn't a lake that side." And I said, "I walked past it." So I went back and I saw this chap on the road, and I said, "How long's that lake been there?" And he said, "Well, all these houses were built just 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and that's the runoff."
Oh, that's like, so there wasn't right then. He was right.
So right in 1968, there wasn't a lake there, so Dave was right. So it is important to get out and examine the areas, especially when it's a major scene.
So Tom, what inspires you? What place is it? The view. You're in beautiful Kinver, so does that inspire you?
Very much so. In fact, most days with my wife, we try and get up over Kimber Edge, have a walk of at least half an hour, and I find that very refreshing and inspiring. Somebody mentioned writer's block earlier. I don't suffer too much from that, but sometimes you get to a point where you just wonder where your story is going next. And I find walking out in the fresh air, Kimber is beautiful woodland, heathland, pasture land, and in fact you can be up there and suddenly it clears the fog in your head and you can begin to come back ready to refreshed and with your imagination, your imaginative juices released again. So I find that very good. But on the basic theme about setting, I think setting is terribly important in a novel, and I think setting can be a character in his own right. Actually, I mentioned earlier my cop series are set in Birmingham, the Black Country. So like Jim, I go out, view this, take photographs, try and really get it right. But you can't come unstuck. In my first novel, Too Smart to Die, I had a scene set in Victoria Square, just outside the council house, right in the heart of Birmingham. People will be familiar with that, no doubt. At that time, the big statue there was in water. The flew in the jacuzzi. She became dangerous. Well, if you go there now, she's no longer in the jacuzzi. She's in the garden. And what happens sometimes is, as time passes, places change, and people will pick you up on things like this. Actually, all you can do is say, "Well, at the time she was in the water." but yes, setting is terribly important, actually, and I think it pays to get it as realistic as possible. But over time, places change. Nothing stays the same forever.
Lovely, thank you. Right, and Misha, what's your view? What place inspires you?
Well, my view from my office, and I have the smallest but the warmest room in the house, which is great. I love it, and it's very cluttered because there are bookshelves all over the place and files and piles of books, and I try to keep it tidy, but it's really, really difficult because I'm not a tidy person. So that's my view from the window is very, very suburban. But I would absolutely say the same that people have been saying about place. For me, place is key. And what I discovered when I started writing was that I would set my books in the city in which I was brought up in. I was brought up in Bristol, and when I left the city at 17 to go to London to university, that was always where my imagination took me back. Now we live in Stoke-on-Trent, and I really, really like this city, but it's only after, I think it's nearly 20 years of being here, that I'm beginning to find it's inspiring my stories. Oh. So written a couple, it's a wonderful place. I mean, they're the bottle kilns. There's all the history. There's all the history of the pot banks. And I've written a couple of Gothic tales. One set on the loop line in the potteries, which is, I think, quite chilling. And also, yes, I find I need to go to my office to write because I need silence. I can't write with noise at all. So I have to shut myself in my lovely warm room, not look too often. The screen is actually in the way of the window, which is quite useful. And then take myself to whichever place I'm going.
Oh, how wonderful. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for that wonderful insight into your writing. I think we're about run out of time. Okay, so many thanks to you all for joining us today. It's been a great pleasure to meet you and talk to you all and talk to you about your writing. There's lots more for you to write about. Keep on doing it. Keep on writing, and good luck with your publishing as well. And thank you very much for joining us today on this talk and for joining us on Staffordshire Day with Staffordshire Libraries. Thank you all. Goodbye.